Today's guest will provide us with a glimpse of the Israeli Arab sector and will hopefully shine some light on the current trends regarding public opinion in both politics and other pressing fields. Mohammad Darawshe is a leading analyst and expert on Israeli, Arab, and Jewish relations, and is the director of the Center for Shared Society in Givat Chaviva. He has advised the Prime Minister's office on development of his community, has managed campaigns for the United Arab List, and has himself dabbled in politics, having served as a council member of his hometown, Iskal. Thank you for joining us, sir.
My pleasure, Talia. Iksal, not Iskal.
Sorry about that. When we spoke in March, you posed the question, how do you say corona in Arabic? Claiming that the pandemic had yet to spread among the communities in Israel. Is it safe to say that you've caught up, and with many Arab towns being labeled red with rising cases, how would you describe awareness today?
Well, Talia, again, a great pleasure to be with you. If we go back to the recording, I would also remember that I said, wait, the second wave, we will win. You know, we were out of the first wave, but in the second wave, the Arab community is going to be there significantly. And unfortunately, I was right. And unfortunately, I'm still right with the fact that the wave is still very active in the Arab community. There's some kind of a sense of control in the last week that is being sensed, but the third wave mainly started as a result of the reopening of the educational systems. That was not specific to the Arab community. That was a national mistake in my view. And the Arab community started behaving as an average Israeli population with the corona issue. Still, I think that the Arab citizens can still pride themselves of being significantly involved in the medical teams that are trying to combat this pandemic. The more than our percentage in the population is reflected in the medical system, and I think that this brings us a great deal, a great deal of pride. But I think that the lockdown that is supposed to start tomorrow is not going to be as respected as you might expect in the general population, mainly because Arab towns have been suffering what we categorize as under policing, not enough police in the Arab community. No long history of trust between the police and the Arab community, and many would still relate to the lockdown as a recommendation instead of duty and responsibility.
Okay, so thank you for that. You mentioned the lack of trust between the authorities and the community itself, specifically with in terms of the lockdown. We'll touch soon on other issues in this regard. I'd like to ask you specifically about this phenomenon of mass weddings that we've heard about in contradiction of the regulations. Of course, these occur in other parts of Israeli society as well, but what is the local leadership doing to try to deal with things like this?
In Italia, the wedding season is over in the Arab community. There are no more wedding seasons. Usually it starts somewhere around sorry. It starts somewhere around end of March and ends around end of October. So we're not there yet. And hopefully we will not be in March with the same kind of threat of the virus as we have it till today. The first wave, we know that it passed over the Arab community. The second wave was mostly affected in the Arab community, was mostly affected by the weddings, the first part of it. But the second part of it was mostly the travel to overseas. Many of the new carriers were people that went overseas, mostly to Turkey. I've seen some kind of indication that more than 50% of the carriers or the new cases came as a result of direct interaction with people that were overseas. And that was also not indicative to the Arab community. I mean, because there were very few countries available for travel, and Turkey, because of its Islamic heritage and East-West type of mixture of culture, is a very attractive place for Arab citizens to travel. Maybe it's not as attractive to Jewish travelers, but for Arab travelers, it is very, very attractive. So the minute that was closed, then there was some kind of a sense of control. Then Dubai opened up, and that was another problem that re-engaged the Arab community into the pandemic. So I think that two things that I would like to sum up with. One is that the Arab community is behaving based on the new Israeli standards of, the accordion of closure and opening. The more the state opens up, the more the pandemic expands in the Arab community. The more it locks down and closes, the more we see some kind of control of that pandemic. What is still unique about the Arab community is enforcement. There's not enough enforcement. The police is not there to make sure that they close all the businesses that are supposed to be closed, and that's an easy thing to do. You can see the open business. You don't have to control the backyard of someone that has a wedding. If you come to my town in a day of closure, I would say 90% of the businesses are open. I can't go lock it. I can't. The municipality does not have an enforcement unit. Arab towns do not have enforcement units, usually because this is a unit that needs, at least for the first couple of years, a significant subsidy. And you're talking about very poor Arab towns that do not have sufficient subsidies. So that's the last unit they would invest money in. And as a result, you end up with some kind of a chaos to some extent. I mean, I'm not saying all Arab towns and villages are in chaos, but respect of national policies during the pandemic period is not practiced properly, and that's where the police is not doing its job. Maybe it is doing its job with the current force that they have. When we talk about what we call civic civic policing, not the use to control demonstrations and things like that, not those forces, not the special units, but civic policing. The discrepancy in budget per Arab citizen is almost versus Jewish citizen is almost 7 to 1. The government, the police invests in civil policing in Jewish towns 7 shekels per 1 shekel invested on an Arab citizen, and so that the police says we don't have enough manpower, and it ends up being reflected in looseness that is present in the Arab community.
Understood, very clear. So we talked about the restrictions themselves. Now let's talk a little bit about the issue of vaccines. Health officials are complaining that the number of people vaccinated in Arab neighborhoods is much lower than in other communities. So much so that some of the branches, the HMO branches, Maccabi, Clalit, Mu'khadet, have invited those seeking vaccination from other areas to come get them from Arab villages so that they don't go to waste. For instance, in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, we've heard. Is there distrust in the vaccination scheme because it's from the authorities, or is there another explanation?
I mean, first, Talia, if that hesitation in the Arab community is allowing more Jews to come to Arab towns and neighborhoods, then I'll recommend to our community to delay their vaccination maybe one more week. Maybe it will be a chance for Jewish visitors to come to Arab towns not only to eat hummus, if at all. Unfortunately, more than 68% of Jewish citizens have never visited Arab towns and villages. They relate to them very often as enemy territory that you should not enter. But the fact that 50% of people that go for the vaccination in al-Fahim are Jews from neighboring towns, this is new. For many of them, this is the first time. So from my perspective, as someone that promotes more Jewish Arab partnership, this is actually a good sign that Jews are seeking some kind of a healing in those Arab towns and villages. Until now, the vaccination rate of Arab citizens is about 8.6% of those that have been vaccinated. It was only 5% last week, so we're catching up. There's some kind of I mean, the fact that we jumped within 1 week from 5% to 8.6%, that is a significant increase. And it means that more Arab citizens than average Jewish citizens are going there. It's not enough. The issue here, the main issue, is awareness and leadership. There is not enough awareness. The state is not doing enough campaigns in Arabic to the Arab community, not using enough the Arab media. They're counting on the Hebrew media as the first wave of awareness, and the Hebrew media is not where average Arab citizens consume their information, and they get their information. So, I mean, people like me, I do watch Ynet and Arutz Time and Channel 13 and all those things, but that's not the case with all Arab citizens. They tend to seek their information from other either local websites or local media stations or radio stations, and not from the national stations that speak Hebrew. So the more the government comes closer with accessibility in information and motivation of the populations in Arabic, the better results we're going to see. We're beginning also to see that Arab political leaders are beginning to express concern. Again, they are a bit late in the process. I mean, the first in the national level, it's mainly the Jewish political leaders and that are doing the job. So when people see Netanyahu as the first person to get the vaccination, that doesn't give much impression. I mean, in the Jewish community, it means 25% of the population will follow him because they see him as their leader. In the Arab community, they do not relate to him as their leader. If you see other, Benny Gantz, maybe he speaks to 5% of the Jewish population. He speaks almost none to the Arab community. And the Arab political leaders are coming a bit late to be the role models for this. Mainly, again, they have not took the initiative themselves, but they haven't been also recruited well enough to this. It's beginning to happen. I've seen Ahmad Tibi, member of Knesset Ahmad Tibi, that they've shown himself on Facebook getting vaccination. Same thing with the Ayman Odi, that he also did the same thing. So there are some signs that are indicative that this is changing. But even if we start catching up, I think that the more Jews that come to get vaccinated in the Arab community, the better. I always say that the medical field is an island of success in Jewish-Arab relations. And the more we expand this island, the better.
Understood. Just one last question on the vaccinations themselves before we move on to other topics, because I know that you're limited in time. One journalist has written, is there any truth to the rumor that imams are calling out against the vaccinations?
Not that I haven't been exposed to. That okay. I mean, it could be some weirdo here or there, but not my imam, not where I go to pray on Friday. In the contrary, he even encouraged me to change my profile page to say that I took the vaccination, and I did. And it was my imam that recommended that I do that. And I must say that, he's from I would call it the mainstream moderate Islam, which I would dare to say reflects maybe 80% of the Arab community. And he's very respected and dignified. So he wouldn't go out of the norm. So when he made that recommendation, I would assume that it's a recommendation of most of his colleagues.
Very clear. Okay, so let's move on to politics now, because of course that's why a lot of people are listening in. We're just over 2.5 months to the election again. With all of this year's past events, what would you say the main issue over which your community members are voting this time?
I think it's the social economic issues. The corona economic implications have been dramatic on the Arab community. And there's this concept called LIFO, last in, first out. That's in accounting. So when you look, for example, at Arab women in the workforce, they were the last group to come into the workforce in the last 10 years. And that was a blessed progress. Arab women 15 years ago, only 17% of them worked. Before the pandemic, it was 41%. So there was a nice, more than almost tripling or 250% increase in percentage of Arab women into the job market. And many of them came into the low jobs, working in supermarkets, in small businesses that that have been that have been hit very bad. By the way, that's not Corona, and it's not, I do not send viruses through Zoom, so don't worry.
We're not worried, but I will say that if you do want to take a break for a second to go get a glass of water, I would be very happy for you to do that because I'm not able to on the other side of this.
I'll manage the next 14 minutes. So those businesses were very harmed, as many other Israeli businesses in the same category. And the biggest wave of unemployment in the Arab community is mainly Arab women. There's a friend of mine, Dr. Marianne Taupo from the IDC, the Herzliya College. And she's examining this topic, and she proves in her new research that the biggest group that was harmed as a result of the Corona economic pandemic is Arab women. They were first to get out, and they're probably going to be the last to come in, because many of the businesses were small businesses that will have a difficulty coming back, which means also lack of second income in all of those Arab households. The second group that was very harmed significantly is ages 18 to 24. Before the pandemic, 38% of this group were what was called NEETs, NEETs, not in employment or education teens. Today, we are up to more than 50% of them. You're talking about 185,000 Arab kids that are not in employment and not in education. The increase jumped from 39% to 51% within the last 4 months. It means that many of those kids did not go to universities, did not go to any employment because there's no new employment opening up for them, and they're stuck. They're floating. And I saw a report a few weeks ago indicating that almost 50% of the crime in the Arab community comes out from that age group. Those kids that are floating doing nothing. They are responsible for 50% of the crime rate in the Arab community. They're responsible for 45% of the traffic accidents in the Arab community. And they're only about 10% of the population. As that group is only 10% of the population, but they're responsible to 50% of the miseries of the Arab community because they're simply floating. Now, this problem doesn't exist in the Jewish community because we have the military and other systems. So most of those kids are poured into some kind of a structure in the Jewish community. Arab kids are poured into a vacuum after they finish high school. The very few that make it to university are the lucky ones, and the rest of them are simply, they seek their destiny. And as I said, 50% of them today are stuck in this twilight zone, I would even call it. If we look at the compensation also of Arab municipalities, I also touched on this a few months ago when I was with you, the compensation that Arab municipalities get for loss of income is also not equal to that of Jewish municipalities, mainly because because the standards of the government are they compensate only loss of income from business, what's called arnona, business property tax, not from private property tax. There are not enough businesses in the Arab community. Their income is from businesses is less than 30%. In the Jewish communities, the income from businesses is 70%. While municipalities report that they have lost income from private property tax, from homes. Individuals that have single homes are not paying their property tax because they got stuck into the economic pandemic. And the municipalities cannot get the compensation for individual property tax or household property taxes. So I think that once the pandemic is over, I think that, and we start measuring the real impact, the real economic impact in the Arab community versus the Jewish community, I would, easily assume it will be almost twice as hard as it was on the Jewish community.
Understood. I think the issue of budget allocation is actually a very good segue to our next question, which deals with strategy of the Arab parties when it comes to this upcoming election. If we see Mansour Abbas's latest bromance with Benjamin Netanyahu, it begs the question whether these moves are being made in order to even bring budgets to the Arab community. Is this something that you recommend? Do you think that there are people in the Arab community who actually view this positive, this closening to the current prime minister?
Well, again, I like to speak numbers. There was a poll done also a couple of days ago. I saw results of it. 42% of the Arab citizens see no harm in engaging with the government in trying to find social economic solutions to the issues. But at the same time, 41% say we're not willing to engage with Benjamin Netanyahu no matter what. If you divide the 42%, you would find that almost 85% of them say we engage with Benjamin Netanyahu because he's the prime minister, but we shouldn't be a political safety net for him. And that's where they criticize Mansour Abbas. So they're not against the act of political engagement. They're against the safeguarding of Netanyahu's government. So they think that the majority, almost 83%, think that Mansour Abbas have gone maybe too far. That it's okay to come to the Knesset to do the real work, which is to bring social economic benefits to the Arab community, to solve problems of crime, housing, unemployment, education. These are the issues that I also have a new poll that I'll be talking about it tomorrow morning in a press conference in Nazareth. It shows that the amount of people interested in Arab members of the Knesset handling the Palestinian issue is only 9%. 91% put social economic issues on the agenda. 42% say the number one issue is crime. We want to solve the problem of crime. We're on the 6th of January. 6 Arab citizens have been killed in 2021. 6. In 6 days, we had 6 people killed. That's one person a day. With this rate, we will probably come to 356 in the end of the year. Last year, we had more than 112 killed in 2020, 95 killed in 2019, 58 killed in 2018. So the rate of crime is almost doubling itself every year. We can't sustain a society like this. So when you ask when the community is asked about what do you want from your politicians, they're so clear. It's a clear-cut answer. Now the question is, how do you bring this about? Put the political, the realpolitik. I mean, where do you engage in realpolitik? What's the red line of political engagement? So many, I would again, there's the poll that I will be sharing tomorrow. It was done by Dr. Hisham Jubran from an institute called Afkar. They've looked at 800 people. They asked 800 people this question, and 82% want Arab members of the Knesset to partner with Jewish members of the Knesset, including government. 82%. 85% support even entering the coalition, not a right-wing coalition. And when you try to break the right wing into between Netanyahu government and Gideon Sa'ar government, more than 70% are willing to go for Gideon Sa'ar government. Now the question is, the joint list today in its current joint shape going to be able to enter a Gideon Sa'ar government? I can already give you the answer before the 23rd of March. No. And that's why today we are at the edge of a split off in the joint list, possibly running into 2 lists, possibly an announcement within the next 72 hours of a third political movement that might emerge, mostly emerging from the municipal leadership that is saying we do not want to continue only hearing about who's first, who's second in the structure of the joint list, which is they're debating about now about this today. I mean, there is an ideological debate within the joint list, but there's also an ego debate within the joint list of is it Ahmad-Bibi number 3 or is he number 4? Is Mansour Abbas number 4? He was 4 in the last time, in the last elections. Now he wants number 1. So the issues of ego also play there. My assumption is, as I said, they're going to split, and a third political party is going to emerge also.
And will this third political party include a new list made up of municipal leaders, or mostly made up of people from the current joint list?
It will be people that have never served in the Knesset. I mean,
That's
I know the first 6 names. I might be one of them. I can't tell you that for sure.
What a scoop! Thank you.
There's a likelihood that this might be announced as early as tomorrow because of the closure. Principally, that was supposed to be announced Sunday, but as I said, there's an effort in the last few hours to try to do it tomorrow because we don't want to get to the dynamics of the full closure that starts tomorrow. But there is a significant political organization that will be based on 2 components. One is the municipal angle. So it will have, I would assume, half of the list will be people that come from municipal background, either existing or past mayors or deputy mayors. And the other half will probably be other social leaders that have that represent issues. Such as youth issues, such as economic, educational, people that are associated with issues that are mostly in the social municipal matters, which puts, the slogan probably is going to be the citizen first. So it's not peace and this, not the big words, but I would call it the pieces of peace.
The more realistic goals. Sir, with the 2 minutes that you have left, because you did say you were running out of time, could you tell us anyway, despite your own political ambitions, we do have a month left before the lists close, before the parties have to submit their list to the Knesset Elections Committee. What would your advice be at the end of the day to the various political factions within your community in order to improve their chances of getting elected?
I would say listen to your population. I mean, the joint list is dropping in the polls. They've dropped in the last 2 months from 15 seats to somewhere around 10 seats. There are 5 seats up for grab. And the reason those 5 seats, that's 1/3 of the voters that voted just they voted 8 months ago. And they're saying we do not want to vote again because of the frustration from not being able to accomplish significant gains in the social economic arena. Nothing changed in the political scene, in the diplomatic scene. They're not voting on the Palestinian issue. They're not voting on the peace deal with the Emirates. They want to vote on social economic issues. So the more our political leaders listen to that pulse in the community, I think that's where they will be able to gain back their trust. I think that what I'm trying to mention is if other political parties are beginning to see. So you see that Meretz, for example, noticed that, so they put 2 seats out of their 5, their 2 Arab representatives out of their top 5 because they want to start some kind of a love affair with the Arab citizens, re-engage Meretz with Arab voters. Just 2 elections ago, which was last year, they gained about 37,000 votes. In the last elections, Meretz dropped to somewhere around 9,000 votes. So they lost 30,000 votes, which is 1 full seat, and Meretz is trying to get it back. I know that Khaldai is looking to emerge 3 Arab candidates in his top 10 seats, in his top 10 list. I know that the Likud are also discussing the possibility of inviting a gentleman called Nail Zouabi from a village called Nin as even a candidate. I think he probably will be the first Arab Muslim candidate in the Likud list. I think that from my point of view, this is a blessed, I bless all those efforts. The more Arab candidates are in a variety of political parties, this will allow the Arab community to be more effective. But an exercise, by the way, that the Jewish community have perfected over the last years. They're 1% of the population. They have currently 4 seats in the Knesset. That they quadrupled their political representation in the Knesset. And I think that, so I recommend to all those parties, all national political parties, grab the moment to come and compete for Arab votes, but also make sure that you have adequate Arab representation and not just what we call good Arabs.
Are the Arab parties worried about these changes, though? Are they worried that the voices will go to the other parties?
I think they're extremely worried. Some of them will go as calling this treason. And they've done that before. But they haven't been able to get their act together. And as long as they're continuing their inner fighting, they're not even busy with trying to maintain their political base and their voter base. So they're worried, and they go to the extreme in labeling those people instead of as I said, get your act together, finalize, are you all together or you're splitting, and engage and start talking to your political base. This is not happening properly.
Understood. We won't take up any more of your time because I know you're limited. I'll just say that there were some questions from journalists asking for links to the data that you represented. So if there's a way that you can share.
If you can send me an email, I'll be more than happy to attend to them, because unfortunately I'm already 3 minutes late and I have another Zoom that I have to be in.
I know. I apologize, sir. And thank you so much again for your time. It was a pleasure.
And an honor for me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. And for the rest of you on the line, please look out for invitations to 2 events that we have next week confirmed. Our first is on Tuesday, January the 12th, addressing the most current polling ahead of the election with the legendary Camille Fuchs. The exact hour will be updated shortly. And the next event on Wednesday, January 13th, it is a special webinar in cooperation with the German and Swedish embassies discussing how our 3 countries have managed or haven't managed the continuing coronavirus pandemic, with an emphasis on the future 2021, and guest hosted by Moav Vardi, a senior foreign correspondent for Israel's public broadcaster. And of course, thanks as usual to my colleagues, Director General of the Jerusalem Press Club, Uri Dromi, and Press Coordinator Rachel Gziel for coordinating and facilitating this call. Thank you to everyone and have a good day. We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.